All right, welcome to everybody around the world. Welcome to all my subscribers. Remaking a video that I did yesterday. I think this is very interesting, quite a perplexing topic. Now, I'm not a physicist myself. I'm a nerd. I've always been a nerd, but I don't know everything. Maybe there's a physicist out there who could probably explain it. But in my brief research that I did in preparation for my videos yesterday and today, I tried looking up in various physics resources to find an explanation for the phenomenon, I guess you could call it, of reflections. I'll better describe it and explain in a second. But I couldn't find anything in my research that actually explained how the reflection is generated. I only saw repeated statements that an image is generated, but I didn't see an explanation as to how the actual image is generated. Okay, of course, they stated the basic physics principles of how light refracts and bounces off things and all that. But my point is, I didn't find anywhere, and to this day, I have absolutely no clue how on earth the reflection of an image. So you have an object, the object has an appearance, that's its image. How does that image get reflected on another surface? Okay, so let me explain. Now, I got my little handy dandy chalkboard here. Okay, so let's just draw a little object. Okay, I don't know what to draw. Let's just draw a tree. Okay, so we got a tree over here. There you go, fancy artwork. Okay, that's our tree. It's a real physical object, we're going to say. Okay, now there's a sun out there somewhere or a source of light, and that sun is beaming down its light waves on this object. Okay, now because the light's beaming down onto this object and bouncing off of its surface, it's easy for us to understand that it's being illuminated. Okay, so in that sense, without the presence of that light, there wouldn't be enough light to illuminate the object for our eyeballs to see it. Okay, I think this is what everybody gets with so far. Okay, now the problem is this: if we have a polished, shiny, reflective surface, okay, over here, and the image of this tree is reflected in that surface. Okay, so what we're going to do here is just draw the little tree reflected in that surface. Okay, so that's the real tree. This is the reflection of the tree. Okay, now my question, I believe, still stands. Right now, this is the real object. We have a light. We have a light source. We have light moving as waves, particles, whatever. Okay, it's bouncing off of the real object. It's illuminating the real object. Okay, the object that we see, the reflected object, is the same object as that object. Okay, that's all fine and dandy. But the enigma is, how does the visual data, the information that comprises this image itself, how does the visual data, because this is the image of the tree, how does it get from point A to point B? Okay, so let me just illustrate that. Okay, we have point A and we have point B. Now, it's all fine and dandy to say, like science says, oh, you have the source of light. We have all these light waves coming down and particles are bouncing off of the object, illuminating it, and that's why you see the image, right? And the physics explanations that I looked up in my brief research, they have all their diagrams of the light waves coming down to the surface, reflective surface, then bouncing off at like a certain angle and all that there to get into that. Okay, now there's two hypotheses that I've come up with, just using logic here, because logic is the best tool. Okay, now the image is getting from A to B one of two ways, logically. Okay, number one is that somehow the light waves, okay, or the light particles, whatever, somehow the light is transmitting the image from A to B. Okay, and the other option that we have is that the object A, and all objects, are actually, this is quite interesting, are actually emitting visual data of themselves, like they're emitting their own image, so to speak, or their own reflection outwards, always perpetually in all directions, as if like a Wi-Fi signal. Okay. Now, of these two scenarios, the first one sounds the most plausible based on what we're commonly taught. The second one sounds a little crazy. But this is the strange thing about reality, okay? If we're to go with the first scenario, that the light somehow transmits the visual information and data for A and from A to B, okay, then we have to ask, how does this occur? This is what I tried researching and couldn't find an answer for. How does that visual data get from here to there? It's all good to hear the explanations that, oh, light hits object A, it bounces off of it, it scatters off of it at angles. You know what I mean? It helps illuminate the object. And just to plainly state that's the object you see because reflections and reflection images are produced. That's not answering the question. The question is how. How is the visual information transmitted from A to B? Okay? A logical explanation. I'm not saying this is the answer, but one plausible, quick to the mind explanation is that all objects actually radiate out their own image, like radiate it outwards, as if like Wi-Fi signal. And when the conditions are met, such as a reflective surface and perhaps another medium such as light or atmosphere or whatever, but with these other conditions being met, like a triangulation, a satisfaction occurs whereby the image can be viewed. Okay, so if the surface wasn't reflective, technically the image would still be there. And this is a logical point that I've made before. Light isn't intelligent as far as we know. So light doesn't know whether an object is reflective and has a glossy surface or not. So light, if it's capable of producing reflections of images, should be producing, so there should be reflections of images being produced everywhere, but it's only if the surface is glossy that we can see it with our eyes, because technically speaking, the same thing is occurring everywhere, whether an object is rough or glossy. You know what I mean? So if on glossy ones the reflection is produced, and that means on all the rough ones, we should still have all the same background processes taking place. We just can't visually see it. You follow me? But that logical thought process leads you to understand that there must be some type of emanating going on. Now, either it's the light, because the light is emanating and it somehow transmits the visual information from A to B, or like I said, the objects themselves are actually emanating visual information of themselves. And when that meets with the condition of, say, a medium or transport source, like, say, light, and a reflective surface, that's when the image is produced. Now, stop and think about this. You could still see a reflection in a mirror in a dark room, okay, provided if you have enough ambient light. You can also see a reflection in a mirror no matter what direction you turn it. If you have a bowl of water on a table, you can see other parts of the room reflected in that bowl of the water, and as you move around, the reflection changes. If I was to hold up a mirror to this chalkboard, I have a mirror here, but it's too confusing backwards, and manipulate the image of the tree, you would see it live action manipulate in the reflection. Okay, so whilst all these reactions, the reaction of the reflection being produced would logically occur probably near or at the speed of light, which is why the live action replication takes place when you manipulate the source object in a mirror, right? It still doesn't answer the great question of how is that image transmitted to the mirror. Okay, so I'm trying to think like how a physicist would think. Okay, a physicist would say the only reason you see it, like I've already said, the only reason we see it is because the surface here is glossy, is reflective. Okay, fine, that's fine. But from what I have, and if I'm wrong, teach me. Like if there's a physicist out there who can explain this and explain it to me, right? But going by what physics appears to suggest, it appears to suggest that light transmits the image. Okay, but as far as I've seen, no explanation of how is given, but just stated that it does. So that's why I said that's hypothesis A. The light is transmitting that visual information to B. Now let's just go on the whim of science and physics, again, if I'm correct in my understanding of it. If the light is transmitting it from A to B, we have to think about it like this. If you have a box over here with a tree in it, you have a box over here with no tree in it, how do you get, even if it's just an image, how do you get the image of a tree over here in this box? You're saying that it's transmitted from A to B. So in some way, the light must be, for lack of a better term, physically transported, or transporting that image, imagely transporting that image. Now, it's easy to imagine stuff similar to this, like Wi-Fi signals. You transmit, wireless movies and TV shows come in wireless and all that. So even though the average person don't understand how that works, we understand that there's, well-established science to it. We make devices that operate like that. We use them on a daily basis, like I'm doing now. So that provides a background to understanding how transmission of images can occur. Now, the problem is that those transmissions are done in code. Okay, when the light is reflecting the image of this tree over here, you tell me, where's the binary or computer code there? You can say, oh yeah, but we have a way of doing it with Wi-Fi. We can transmit images like that invisibly. Yeah, but that's by code. They're received by something that can interpret that code and then relay it as an image or an output. Where do you have those things taking place here? Okay, in real life, everyday environments, you could have a body of water like a lake reflecting the image of the tree, but how does the image of the tree get transmitted there by the light? So what I'm leaning towards is, even though it's the crazier sounding of the two, is I don't think light is actually transmitting anything, because it's not like it's picking up particles of the actual object and transferring them. Even if it was in some strange way, how does it carry them? How does it maintain the image and its orientation, relative orientations? For example, if you walk around that lake where the image of the tree is reflected, it will change and distort in relation to where your perspective is when you look at it. You know what I mean? So how, if light is transmitting the image, even if it's at near light speed or at light speed, then how in the world is it actually transmitting it? It's not taking any physical particles, as far as we know, from A to B. Somehow it's relaying that visual information from A to B. You follow me? So this is where the mystery is. However, hypothesis B would say, if, I know this sounds crazier, but I'm just looking at the logical possibilities. If all objects radiate outwards or emit outwards some type of like aura of like their image, and I'm not going to try and pinpoint how far out it can extend. Maybe it's quite far. But let's just say that they do. Now, if they did do that, okay, then the Wi-Fi concept, the transmission issue, isn't an issue, because the objects themselves are doing the transmission from A to B. It's only when that transmitted data meets a glossy reflective surface and enough light to illuminate it for physical eyeballs to see it that you will be able to see it. Now, you see what I mean? Hypothesis B seems to make more sense off the top of the head. You know what I mean? Hypothesis A, which I think science is trying to claim, is that the light transmits the visual data somehow. But how is it doing that? That doesn't make any sense. Okay? If we use the example of a computer screen display, if you have a movie or video games are a better example, because everything is artificial and they're created. Okay? So in a video game, you might have a tree, and in the video game there might be a lake, and you could see the tree reflected in that lake, right? In the same physics of like real life, when you walk around it, the image in the lake moves, the tree moves, this and that there. It live action replicates the actions of the tree if it's moving in the wind or if birds fly on it. So video games are pretty complex today. We can replicate that stuff. But just like in real life, just like how a camera works like an eye, okay, and all our technologies basically are replications of organic things that occurred naturally on Earth. In that same fashion, I kind of went off topic there. Let me get back on board really quick. It was the analogy, the real world analogy. Give the example of the eye transmitting the information. Man, gosh, that just flew right out of my head. Give me 1 sec. If you were there, what was the last thing I was saying just before I went off track and then forgot? It was just before I started thinking of like real world examples of it, and I mentioned like the eye and the camera and all of that there. Anyways, I'll get back to maybe it'll come back to me if I start talking about everything else I was talking about. Yeah. Yeah, so I'll go back to what I was saying. So, like I said, you have two hypotheses. It's either transmitting it or everything radiates out. So if everything radiates out, that's hypothesis B. Okay, hypothesis B, it appears at face value to make more sense. Okay, hypothesis A would involve how does light actually transport that visual data and all of that there. So, I completely forgot what the heck I was saying. I really wish I could remember what it was, but I was hoping somebody might be able to pop in and say what it was. Bear with me, otherwise I'm going to have to end the stream because that's pretty much a dead end there. What the heck was it? I got the dryer going in the background, clinking all the clothes around, tink, tink, tink. I can't think. It's breaking my train of thought. Like, I can't concentrate to think on it. Ah, yeah, that's right. Computer games. Thank you. There you go. I told you it'll come back to me. Anyway, so with the computer games, right? So if you have the tree in the computer game, a lake, and the reflection of the tree, blah, blah, blah. That's what I was saying. Okay? So in the video game creator has to create in-game physics for how that occurs and all that. Again, this uses code, right? But real life, like we have, isn't using code, or is it? Right? That's what I'm going to get to. So in the video game, that's what I was saying. Everything kind of works like how it does in real life. The eye with the camera and all of that there. That's where I went off track. So with the video game, the creator of the video game, the designer, the creator, has to program all that stuff in there using his own code, right? He has to program the real tree. He has to program the reflection, the tree reflection, okay? And it has each have their own physics and how they work, okay? But it's all programmed in there because in the video game, right? Get ready for a huge epiphany in a second. In the video game, that tree isn't actually producing a reflection. The reflection is just the visual data of that tree being relayed by in-game code physics over to the lake so that its image can be replicated there. Now, by that process, I think that's what's happening in real life. Okay, in real life, I think there's more logical evidence that we live in a type of created, designed matrix, so to speak, meaning the thing that God created. And the way it works is something very logical, sensible, and down to earth that we could probably even comprehend, which is how other visual displays work. Okay, and in order for those things to display things, all of that has to be programmed. It uses code and all of that. So if you stop to think about it, if everything around you is like a giant matrix grid of loci points upon which, which would be pixels to dumb it down on a computer screen, right? To simplify it down on a computer screen, that might be what's all around us right now. We just can't see the pixels, the pixels or the loci. Okay, so just like with the video game, if we have the real tree, so to speak, over here as an A, sorry, everything's backwards on here. We have the real tree as A. Okay, in the video game, that's not a real reflection. It's a programmed, you know what I mean? Like I explained. So what I'm saying is with hypothesis B, okay, in real life, every object, as in object A, is radiating out its own image. Okay, and when that image radiation meets the corresponding required symbiotic components for visual manifestation to physical eyes, such as reflective surface and light to provide a light source so that you can see things, that's when you get the image. And this would be possible if everything is on a matrix kind of pixelated grid. Whether we see that grid or not is irrelevant. We don't even see air, but air's all around us, right? So this grid if this grid is everywhere, then there is no mystery over how that image gets over here. Okay, because in a computer program with the video game software, there's no mystery how the image of the tree goes from here to the surface of the lake because it's programmed. How it gets from here to there, there's no mysterious, transmission by light particles and this and that. It's just programmed. It replicates over here. And the computer the video game program knows it's not like everything in the environment of the video game will be reflective. If you're walking through a desert, the sand doesn't reflect the trees, does it? No. But when you get to a body of water, the body of water, because the programmer has programmed it to have principles and conditions, water should be reflective, which means it will reflect images. So when you, the user in the game, are walking through the desert, you don't see any reflections until you get to a body of water. And like I'm saying, in real life, that's the same background system that's in place with the grid, the matrix, the pixels, okay? And the conditions that are set up by the designer in the same fashion are in real life. We don't see reflections unless it's a reflective surface, just like in the video game with the video game designer. Okay, so, but in reality, like I pointed out, if light hits all objects, in either hypothesis A or B, there should be reflections of everything off of everything, whether we see them or not. We only see them if the surface is smooth and glossy and provides, our eyeballs the means to see it. But the same processes and reflections, although invisible, would be produced on all rough surfaces. So everything everywhere in either hypothesis is either bouncing off and creating images or emanating images. Okay, in either scenario, there's forms of emanation. It's just a matter of who's doing the emanation, so to speak, right? But I think hypothesis B makes more sense. Everything's just if you think about quantum physics as well, this makes a lot of sense because light is a wave and a particle. We have the double slit experiment, which is great. I won't get into that, save time. But light is both a wave and a particle. It's one or the other dependent upon an observer. If an observer is looking at it, it's one of the two. I can't remember which way. I always get it mixed up, right? Let's just say particle. So if you look at it, it becomes a particle. If you stop looking at it, it becomes a wave, right? So if it's hypothesis A and the light is transmitting the visual image data from point A to point B, then that's a further question. Is it the wave form that's doing this, or is it the particle form that's doing this, right? But the other strange thing is with hypothesis B, if every object radiates off an image of itself exponentially, possibly in all directions everywhere, wouldn't this utilize some form of energy, or does it use some form of quantum higher source of beyond energy that doesn't require like material like levels of storage? You know what I mean? Maybe it's just an infinite level and it doesn't rely on, you have to keep topping up like a physical level of fuel to keep that going, because otherwise it'll just be perpetually decaying. It could be perpetually decaying, but it would have to be that it decays so slightly, and the slight amount that it decays over time is enough to produce the required images constantly, and it's never really noticeably diminishing during the duration of perceivable experience. But anyways, that's getting overcomplicated and things. So anyways, I really doubt that light waves or light particles bounce off of objects and then somehow, in whatever way, pick up copies of that image and then accurately transmit it across space to another location and then replicate that image with the correct orientation and this and that there. But it's all dependent on the observer as well, because if you're walking around, that image reflects and moves, right? So that would imply that light is bouncing off of everything and carrying visual data off of everything in every direction, everywhere, irregardless of whether it's hitting a reflective surface or not. So both hypotheses are quite similar. Like I said, it just comes down to who's doing the emanating. Okay, hypothesis A is that the light source, that light in general, is doing the emanating and the transmitting. Hypothesis B is saying that everything is emanating, but it also requires light for illumination for physical eyes to see, and a reflective surface for a reflection to be feasibly visible on. So anyways, I have exhausted the use of my tongue to try and sound fancy, so I will stop trying and I will put my brain to rest and let everybody digest this video. So if you found this interesting, let me know. If you found it pointless and stupid, feel free, let me know. If you have a solution for this and you're a fancy pants person yourself and you can explain it, go ahead. But just remember, like I said, I want to know how the image from A is transmitted to B. How? Don't just say, oh, it does. That's just a quirk of nature. That's the whole point here. I'm trying to address why. Instead of just leaving a question mark, oh, that's just what happens. That's not getting answers. You have to ask why. Then you understand a deeper layer of reality, right? So anyways, I think it all points to that there is this matrix grid that the creator has designed. That's what everything operates by. Um, it explains quantum entanglement and everything else. I mean, if you poke a molecule over here on the other side of the universe, a corresponding molecule feels that poke. This makes sense if everything is on that one grid. If that one grid could be arbitrarily counted as a unit of one unto the creator God, then anything within that unit one from one side of the universe to the other is on that same one platform. Okay, so it would be instantaneous connection between the two, no matter the distance. Okay, even if that's on the macro, on the micro, everything's pixelated as the pixels. But remembering that the micropixels, all the micropixels in sum are just the one macro pixel. So the one macro pixel, you could say, would answer like the quantum entanglement type principle, right? But it all goes back to, I think there's a creator that's done this. So it would make a lot more sense of things. And like I've said before, all the laws of science and physics and everything that we have, isn't it nice and convenient how convenient they are, that they exist and that they're the way they are and structured the way they are and discoverable and utilizable? Isn't that so convenient? Right? Thought-provoking question. The second thing is, where did these laws come from? Like, where did the principles, more importantly, for these laws to come from? It's all fine to say 2 pi r exists. That's just how it works in nature. Okay, where did the principle exist? Like in the primordial dawn of all things, where did the very first proto-principle come into existence that said, oh, laws of physics can exist? Because you have to have that principle before a law of physics can exist. You can't just say, oh, well, you can magically have formulas and laws that just pop randomly into existence. No, it's got to come from somewhere. There's got to be a principle for it to exist before it can exist. Anything. Okay, so if you want to see it, science, all these formulas, this and that there, that's fine and dandy. You just want to say, oh, that's just how the formulas are in nature. They look so simple to us, but that's just the way they are. Okay, well, where did the principle for formulas come from? Where did the principle for any of the aspects of how those formulas work in real application, where did any of those principles come from? They had to come from somewhere. There had to be a grounds and a parameter for them to actually occur within and operate by in order for them to operate. What if the principle of the universe was that, oh, no law should be able to operate out? So maybe a law principle could start, like a law, like one of the science formulas or laws could start to act out, but part the way through, it just goes into chaos and disorder and can't go to fruition. So you can never act out 2 pi r. You know what I mean? You have to have the principle for all formulas, for all those laws, right? A principle for 2 pi r to exist, a principle for this, a principle for that. You have to have principles for everything. You know what I mean? Where did those things come from? Principles can be ordained by a creator and a designer, but they can't just come about by nothing, right? You'd have to have a principle for principles before you could even have any principles, right? And where do you get the principle for principles to come from? From a primordial nothingness, right? There you go. Right, so it's all fine and dandy to say, oh, you get old, you know what I mean? So anyways, that's it for this video. Take care, folks. God bless.